Hey, welcome back to Institute Fitness. I'm Zach. Today we're going to be going over the nutrition plan that I created to help educate individuals about how I would structure a plan if I was trying to achieve a wide variety of goals. So this is the monthly regimen for eating, or just the MRE. I have a lot of military themed elements to my program because, well, I'm in the military and I kind of like how it works. So this chart is, again, an educational tool. My goal is never to tell somebody exactly what to eat or how to eat it or anything along those lines. The idea is to educate you about what it is that you're doing and how that affects your body. I want to draw your attention to this note down here at the bottom. So this list is not all-inclusive, nor is it intended to be restrictive. Institute Fitness employees are not dietitians, therefore do not write out meal plans. The monthly regimen for eating is merely a representation of eating patterns Institute Fitness would utilize to achieve desired results given an array of fitness goals. So again, remember, I want to use this to teach you about nutrition. I want to use this to teach you about how your body works with nutrition. I want to use this to help you put together your own diets, your own nutritional plans that are going to work for you to achieve certain results. Never to tell you exactly what to eat or anything along those lines. For one, honestly, that's boring. For two, it is effective if you can stick to it, but since most people can't stick to, these hardcore diets and things like that, then that makes them ineffective. I've also found that they tend to really burn people out when it comes to motivation, because if you feel like you have to eat so perfect all the time to achieve results, then unfortunately most people are not going to do that. The fact is, you don't have to eat that perfect. There's a huge difference between eating healthy and eating to achieve certain fitness goals. In this scenario, we are looking at how to eat to achieve fitness goals, primarily changing your body composition. That being said, the most important thing isn't necessarily the healthiness of the eating, it is the pattern that you eat your foods in. When do you take in certain macronutrients, and how much of them do you take in? So as we talk about serving size and amount, I want to draw your attention to this. These numbers in the upper corners here, the grams, 15 grams, 25 grams, and 35 grams, that is the average serving size. So basically what I'm telling you is, if you were to go grab a bunch of fat sources, such as olive oil, peanuts, some type of seed, whatever, if you were to grab these items and look at the nutrition facts, the average serving size is probably going to be right around 15 grams. So whenever I put together programs, nutrition plans, I have that in mind typically. I have in mind, okay, this is the average serving size, so this is kind of what I would assume people would eat whenever they eat, that type of food. Whether or not you adhere to that could change depending on how many calories you need to take in and what your goals are. For example, we're going to use my diet again. My diet is 4,150 calories. That's a lot of calories. So there's no way that I can simply just go with these size grams, with these size of servings, when my intake is more than twice what the basis of these what these are based on. So when we look at the nutrition facts and it says, 2,000 calorie diet and so on and so forth, and then it breaks these down as the standard serving size. Well, these aren't based on a 2,000 calorie diet or anything like that. However, what I'm saying is that if I'm eating more than twice what I guess the average person is eating, then it would almost make sense that my serving size almost doubles on these. However, it also depends on what your goal is. So really what matters here again is the same three elements. It's always going to be calorie intake, macronutrient ratio, and then of course resistance training. So this is really just to show you the macronutrient timing and patterning. And it's not really going to get into ratio. That's going to be up to you to choose which type of ratio you want to. So let's get a little bit into these lists. I'll explain these and then I'll explain more about the patterning. So when it comes to fats, these are pretty straightforward. Most of your oils, or all of your oils, are fat. Oil is fat, basically. Some of them are considered healthier for you or better for you, and some are considered not quite as healthy. Typically speaking, the healthier something is, it's because it has a higher percentage of, or a higher content of, monounsaturated fat. Something like an olive oil is usually, extra virgin olive oil is kind of the prototype when it comes to that. And then you have something like coconut coconut oil, which is a higher saturated content. So I'm sorry, saturated fat content. Now that doesn't mean it's not good for you. That doesn't mean it's not great when it comes to fitness. All it means is that it's a different ratio of saturated to unsaturated fats, and they both can be very beneficial. Both can be healthy for you. Both can be great for fitness programs. Um, I recommend that you take a look at the macronutrient block seminars for the fats, the protein, and carbohydrates, and start to learn a lot more about fats as those seminars are pieced together. I do want to point out a couple things though. When it comes to nuts and seeds, often we hear things like peanuts are great sources of protein. That's true, but the way these lists are separated is that they're separated by what is the primary source of calories. So when we're talking about a peanut, when you hear that a peanut is a great source of protein, or if you hear that something is an excellent source of protein, that is a standard that has been approved, that if something has more than X amount of grams of protein, it can be called a great source of protein. So this is approved by, basically a government approval that says, yes, you can advertise it as that. I think the FDA is who controls that. And so with peanuts, since they're at, I believe, about 7 grams of protein per serving, they're able to say that they're a, great source of protein or whatever. But that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on the fact that they do have protein in them, but they do have almost as many carbs as they do protein, if not the same amount. The primary source of calories, however, comes from fat. So from our perspective and from me educating you, you need to be focused on all that. If I eat a peanut, I'm not just eating fat. I'm not just eating protein. I'm eating fat, protein, and carbohydrates. But the majority of the calories is coming from fats. And so I can look at this as a fat source, realizing that it does have some protein and some carbohydrates in it as well. As we move a little bit further down the list, we get to another one. I have here listed egg, yolk, as in just the egg yolk. Now, the fat in an egg is pretty much all contained inside the yolk. However, the protein in an egg is about half in the yolk, half in the white. So if I eat an egg yolk, I'm not only getting fat, I am going to get about half the protein from that egg as well. But all of the fat from an egg will be in the yolk. So if we're looking at an egg and it has, let's say, 7 grams of protein and 4 grams of fat, all 4 grams of fat are basically going to be in the yolk, whereas opposed to only about half that protein will be in the yolk and half that protein will be in the white. So what does that mean? Well, that means if I'm eating egg yolks, or if I'm eating whole eggs, I will be getting fat along with my protein. But if we move over here to the protein section, and let's say I was to just eat the egg whites, which I actually don't have listed on here, but if I just ate egg whites, they are solely protein. So they could be considered a protein source right along with the rest of these. However, if I was to eat the whole egg, I'm going to be getting a great source of protein here that also has a higher fat content. So a whole egg by itself, while it is definitely healthy, or can be healthy, and it can definitely be great for a fitness program, we do have to realize that it does have fat, not just protein alone. So it's going to be categorized with some of these great sources of protein that also have a higher fat content, such as your not so lean meats, tofu, salmon. And again, this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just some examples. We also have what's called a higher carb protein. These are going to be things like your meat substitutes, so like soy-based proteins, cottage cheese, yogurt. They all have a fair amount of dairy sugars in them, lactose, as well as maybe even fruit in them. So these might be higher sources of protein, where cottage cheese may have 15 grams of protein per serving, but you're also going to get a significant amount of carbohydrates with it in order to get that protein in. The reason I'm bringing this out is because you need to be aware of that. Because when we get a little bit further down the list here and we realize that you're looking at being aware of what type of macronutrient you're taking in at each meal, you need to understand that if you're taking in, let's say, a soy-based protein, and you're taking in 25 grams of protein, but also getting 25 grams of carbohydrates with it, that 25 grams of carbohydrates does count towards your carbohydrates. There's no way around it. So even though it can be healthy, even though it can be good for your fitness routine or your fitness results, you have to be aware that those carbs do count as carbs, regardless of if it is a quote-unquote meat or not. All right, so the rest of this list is pretty straightforward, pretty much just supplements and different types of meats and seafood and things like that. Moving forward, we have carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are pretty straightforward for the most part. You got your fruits, your vegetables, plants, different plant roots, or root plants, I'm sorry, grains, pasta. I do want to draw your attention to the fact that veggies is listed over here in the quote-unquote free section. Veggies are, in fact, carbohydrates, but the ones listed over here are very low impact, and they have very low net carbs. So they're usually what we consider fibrous carbs. So these fibrous vegetables, they the majority of their calories again come from protein, or I'm sorry, come from carbohydrate. However, they're not going to be very impactful. So if I eat a bunch of leafy greens, it's not going to be anything that I need to worry about considering as a carbohydrate. It's just something that's going to give me some good vitamins and nutrients. Back to the carbohydrate section. The one that I really want to point out is beans. You hear all the time about beans being a great source of protein. Again, by definition, they are a great source of protein because they have a fair amount of protein in them. But there are more carbohydrates in beans than there are grams of protein. Again, standard beans typically have a higher amount of calories from carbohydrates than they do calories from protein. And that's what we're mainly focused on because there's no way you could eat beans as a source of protein unless you were calling it a source of carbohydrates as well. Again, the rest of this is pretty straightforward. I listed pretty much just the natural foods. Of course, you have like your breads and different versions of cereals and things like that. I have them on here, but there are a ton of things that fall into this carbohydrate category because a lot of man-made foods are carbohydrates. However, I chose to pretty much just list the natural ones. And you can always ask me or just Google a food and just take a look at the nutrition facts and see where the majority of the calories come from in that food, and then you can classify it for yourself as well. Now, finally, we have the free section. I already explained the vegetables. Some of these sauces are basically just no-calorie sauces. The one thing I do want you to be aware of is that a lot of these sauces have a high sodium content. So while I call them free from a caloric standpoint and from a macronutrient standpoint, that doesn't mean they don't necessarily, might not necessarily be negative. It just means that they're not going to impact you necessarily from a fitness standpoint, from changing your body composition or so on and so forth. So I want you to be aware that the goals are not the same. Again, healthy eating is not necessarily the same as eating to achieve a specific physique or a specific fitness result. But I think that these things used in moderation are completely okay, just like all of the beverages that I have listed on here. Black coffee, any kind of tea that you want, sparkling water as long as it's not flavored with sugar, and then just regular water as well. So this pretty much runs us through the lists. The first three are our macronutrient lists. The last one is just kind of a hodgepodge of different things. And that brings us to the final section, which is going to be the meal plan. Now, I already have this filled out for myself. We've already broken down my meal plan. We know that I'm at 4,150 calories per day is what I'm trying to reach. That means I need a whole lot of food fairly often. Now, I always recommend that people eat about every 3 hours, which puts us usually around 5 to 6 meals per day. Those meals are going to start immediately when you wake up, and they're going to end whenever they end. So there's no cutoff time. There's none of this like don't eat after 6 p.m. or something like that. No arbitrary rules to this. Again, unless you have a medical professional that tells you what to do, by all means follow that. The other thing you might want to be aware of is certain things you eat at night may not agree with your system very well. They may make you sleep poorly, have indigestion, things like that. So you'll have to be aware of that for yourself. And you can always cram things into 5 meals a day if you want to. So for me, I know that I need to get a fair amount of protein in, and I like to have protein at every single meal, and this is usually something that I recommend for everyone to do for a variety of reasons. The first reason that we put protein at every meal is because your body's going to need that protein, but we don't exactly know when your body needs it. It pretty much just needs a supply of it all day long because you're recovering all day long. So since your body doesn't have a great mechanism for storing protein in the form of protein, we want to make sure that some is readily available for us whenever we need it. Also, protein, there's a lot of studies that have shown that protein has a great balancing effect on your blood sugar levels. So it's great to take in protein at each meal. It tends to also make you feel full and satisfied longer because I believe it is often showed to slow down the digestion of food in general. And then finally, when we talked about the thermic effect of food, there's a lot of research that shows that protein has a higher thermic effect than the other two macronutrients. So in other words, basically what that means is that when you're digesting protein, it tends to raise your metabolic rate higher than the other two would. Now, all of this is important and everything, but really, again, we're at the root of this. We're just looking at when am I taking in the calories from these sources. And again, my recommendation for myself is going to be I want to eat protein at every single meal, although this is a similar recommendation I would make for anybody, regardless of what their goal was. Now, the next thing that I'm going to take a look at is my carbohydrate schedule. There's a pretty commonly used technique in the fitness industry for making sure that you stay lean, even if you're eating a fair amount of food. And this is going to basically bring you back to the thing called the carb tank that I taught you about during the basic training course. So if you remember the carb tank, that tank empties out as you're not intaking carbohydrates. If we also think about what carbohydrates are used for, they're primarily used for just straight up energy. Well, at nighttime, I typically won't need as much energy, especially while I'm sleeping. At least I won't need as much energy in the form of carbohydrates as during different times of the day. So typically what's called carb tapering is used, which is tapering the amount of carbs you take in as the day goes on. That's typically used in order to allow that carb tank to start to drain as the night goes on. And then when you sleep, of course, the carb tank is going to drain even more. So in this scenario, I've ran my numbers and I plan on eating over 600 grams of carbohydrates per day, which means I'm going to have probably over 100 grams of carbs at each of these 5 meals. But then I'm not going to have any significant sources of carbohydrates at my 6th meal. So this is just my program. Often for individuals, plans might look something like this, where their breakfast, lunch, and dinner, those typical meals, will have a carbohydrate source. However, those in-between meals, they won't. Now, in the in-between meals, a common pattern that I would like to utilize is to stagger when people are taking in high sources of carbohydrates and high sources of fat. Why do you think that is? Well, if we think back to what their function is in fitness, both carbohydrates and fats are primarily used for just straight up energy. So if I was taking in a lot of fat and a lot of carbohydrates at the same meal, let's say something, for example, like a peanut butter sandwich, that gives me both of my main sources of energy that I need. So if I'm trying to lose body fat, I have so much energy taken in at that time that maybe my body doesn't have a reason to tap into body fat as a tool to use for extra energy, right? So typically when you're on a more controlled diet that is intended to make you lose fat, oftentimes you'll have a bigger stagger where you may have carbs, not have carbs, not have carbs. And then on the in-between meals, maybe you'll replace those carbs with fats. Now, it doesn't have to look like that. Again, these are just examples. But that is a pretty common technique that you'll see if you were to look up a lot of these fitness diets and or bodybuilding diets intended to make you lose body fat. That's a pretty common technique. So again, I'm going to have carbs meals 1 through 5, protein meals 1 through 6, and I'm going to toss my fats in right here. Now, the reason that I chose not to have fats on these 2 meals is because I work out in the middle of the day. My 4th meal is actually going to be my post-workout protein shake. So there's going to be a ton of carbohydrates. It's close to 200 grams of carbohydrates in this, and then a fair amount of protein as well. I don't really want fat to slow down the digestion there. I want to just get this stuff shot straight into my body and let my body work with it. And then I tend to work out better if I don't have fats immediately beforehand. It's just something I've noticed about myself. So I'm going to space my meals out exactly like this. And as you can imagine, without having carbohydrates at my last meal of the night, I'm going to have probably a higher serving of fat there than I would at some of these other meals. So my last meal of the night will have something like a full fat dressing, like a ranch dressing, oil and vinegar, or maybe it'll be something like an omelet, for example, because an omelet's a way that I can get a lot of protein and vegetables in. A lot of protein and fat in. I can even throw some vegetables in, but I won't have any carbohydrates at that meal. So this kind of progresses into how do you use this for yourself. I just explained maybe how I'm going to design one of my meals, but let's take a look at how you might utilize this for yourself. So if I was looking at a meal like my meal number 6, for example, where I'm supposed to have fats, I'm supposed to have protein, but I am not supposed to intake carbohydrates. All I need to do is go over to the list and start piecing together something from the fats list and something from the protein list that makes a good meal, in my opinion, based on my taste buds, based on my preference for eating, and so on and so forth. So for me, I already mentioned the fact that I would do maybe whole eggs. So I'll do whole eggs, maybe throw some cheese on it and throw some vegetables in it, and we'll call it a day. That's going to be my omelet. Now, what if I don't want that meal? Okay, well, let's take a look at something else I can eat. I can eat any type of meat, any type of seafood. I can do supplements if I want. Pretty much the only thing on this protein list that I'm not going to do is these higher carb proteins like yogurt, cottage cheese, or the meat substitute. And again, this is only talking about my sixth meal of the day. So maybe at nighttime I just want to do something really simple, like have a casein protein shake because it digests very slow. And along with that casein protein shake, maybe I'm just going to have some proteins, some kind of peanuts, something like that. This is really where your preference comes in, and this is really where I enjoy giving you a pattern, but allowing you to apply this to whatever foods you like, whatever lifestyle you have, and then all you have to do is make sure that you stick to that pattern. So hopefully that makes sense to you. We'll look at one more meal type. So when I have a protein and carbohydrate meal. Now, if I have a protein and carbohydrate meal, now I need to be aware of the fats. I'm not going to take in any of these fat sources. I'm also not going to take in any of these higher fat proteins. At a protein carb meal, I'm going to have something much leaner, 95% lean or better, and I'm going to have some kind of carbohydrates. So a great example of this would be rice as a carbohydrate, and then some type of meat. So if I'm having something like a stir fry, and I'm using a lean protein, whatever vegetables I want, and whatever rice I want, as long as I'm not using a bunch of oil to cook it in. So if I'm just doing like a steamed stir fry or something like that, or just spraying a little bit of, although most cooking spray is made out of oil, if I just spray a tiny little bit of cooking oil on my, or not cooking oil, but the cooking spray on my pan before I cook, that should be probably okay. So this is a good example of where I'm going to have a protein source and a carbohydrate source without a fat source, and that's going to give me that meal. It would not be okay, again, to have a high fat protein at that meal, just like if we go back to my meal 6. If I was to have a salad with, let's say, grilled chicken and some type of dressing, it would not be okay to have a dressing that has a high sugar content, nor do I want to add croutons to my salad because they're made of breading, right? So in that scenario, in meal 6 scenario where I don't have carbohydrates, I can't add something like croutons or, again, have one of these higher carbohydrate proteins or something like that. So it's just important that you're very aware of what you're putting in and that all you need to do is stick to this pattern. And this pattern will force your body to change the way that we want it to change. So my recommendation is to take this chart, sit down with a piece of paper, and write out at least 2, if not 3 different options for each one of your meals. So for meal number 1, my first meal of the day, give myself 2 or 3 options. That way I don't get sick of it. I have a variety of vitamins and nutrients coming into my diet on a daily basis. Maybe I have a quick go-to option if I don't have time, if I'm running late in the morning. And really just know what your lifestyle is and build this diet using my knowledge, but using your own food preferences to give yourself a pattern that will force your body to change the way that you want it to change. Hopefully this has been informative for you. As always, I appreciate you coming here to learn with me at Institute Fitness. Please make sure to reach out to me with any questions, any kind of recommendations on how I can make one of these products better or some of this information better. And again, like I said, thanks for visiting Institute Fitness. Get out there, use this MRE, put your meal plan together, stick to it, stick to the pattern more than anything. And as always, bring me those results. I'll see you next time in class.